Happy anniversary! President Trump's historic first year in office has been, well, historic for all sorts of reasons, depending on whom you ask. And since we here at the Marist Poll like to ask people of all stripes what they think, we've got numbers on the good, the bad, and the ugly of the Trump term so far. And let's talk sugging and frugging. What? All the more reason to stick around for this episode of Poll Hub. And hi, everybody. This is Poll Hub. I'm J.D. Dapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll, and we are still here at the Hancock Center at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
And Donald Trump is still in the White House after 1 year. Some people actually weren't sure that was going to happen. I wasn't sure that was going to happen, but it did. First year in office. Maybe he hasn't been the most polled president in his first year.
Although
but
I suspect it's pretty close.
Pretty close. And so two things always stand out to me about what's happened over the last year. One is the kind of the amazing number of questions that have been asked because of all the things that he has done and said. And two is that almost nothing ever seems to change about the way people feel about him. Is that where we stand after 1 year?
First part, definitely so. And the second part, there's been some change in some of the numbers, but you have to drill down a little bit in them. But, you know, the bottom line, I guess, you start off and say this has not been a good poll year for Donald Trump. I mean, he's been rated in all the polls, pretty much all the scientific polls, as being the lowest of a president in the history of polling during the completion of his first year. And it stayed pretty much, mid to high 30s most of the way. So it's not been pretty.
And what we found in a survey that we did in collaboration with NPR and the PBS NewsHour for this first anniversary is that 53% of Americans actually don't think that the president has had really the best year. They don't describe it as a success. In fact, a third of Americans describe his first year as a major failure.
And 53% say it's either a failure or a major failure. I mean, that's a kind of a strong word, failure, whether it's major or not.
And
failure is it's not like right direction, wrong direction, good or bad.
But it's also very polarized.
Mm-hmm. And I was just going to say, let's remember, though, he's elected with a plurality. Not actually a plurality. He's elected with a deficit in the popular vote.
A minority. He did not win the popular vote, but he won the Electoral College.
That becomes, he didn't have, if the best way you could look at this for Donald Trump is most presidents come in a lot higher, and so when they fall, they might fall further. He came in low. He still has fallen, but, not quite as far as others may have because he didn't have that far to go.
A couple of positives, things that are more positive than negative are people's impressions of the economy. It's just a plurality, which means it doesn't reach over 50% of Americans thinking that he's done a good job, but certainly more think he's done well than think he's done poorly, which is unusual. And a second bright spot, I think, is how people have characterized his handling of ISIS. I think people feel that there have been positive developments there, not necessarily because they know a lot about it, but because we haven't heard a lot about it.
It's not been in the news.
And so it hasn't been in
the
news as a problem. And those are two bright spots for the president.
I was going to jump in with one other thing here. There's a common, somewhat misconception that President Trump's base has been totally intact during this period. So we hear that, his numbers are, he's not reaching out, he's not doing better among other groups, but his base is intact. I found it very interesting that the New York Times sort of put together a whole list of 67 subgroups of the population, which took, I assume, some interns a long time to put together. And they wanted to know, well, how has he done with each of these groups? And the answer is he's gone down with each of them, all 67, which includes things like Republicans, Tea Party people, Trump supporters, white evangelical. His base has eroded, but not as much as the other groups have.
And also minimally. I mean, you're
Yes.
talking about
3-4
moving
points.
from,
Yeah.
you're talking about moving from the mid to low 90s to now the high 80s in a number of
Yeah.
these
That's in
areas.
terms of approval among his fans.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if you look at people who say that they voted for him in 2016, or you look at Republicans, I mean, those numbers are still strong and very solid. And certainly if you look to compare him perhaps to another opponent or another candidate that's a Democrat or an independent, you would find those numbers would come back together for him as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, whenever you're surveying about the popularity of a president, it's kind of in absence of him running in a campaign or her against someone else. It's a very different story when you've got a competitor. But that brings us to 2018. So this is a midterm election. We have seen over the last 4 or 5 months in lots of small races and some fairly big ones, including in Alabama, where Democrats seem to be wildly overperforming what they would normally be doing in either safe Republican seats, leaning Republican seats, pretty good Republican seats, and Democrats keep winning up and down the ballot, it seems. Is this likely to hold from what we're seeing, from the fact that his approval ratings don't really change over the course of the first year? Is this likely to hold, or is there more there than meets the eye?
I would suggest that when you look back to prior presidents, it's always dangerous with Donald Trump to look at how things have been, because the future sometimes is not how we remember it. But if you look back in time, you look at people like Bill Clinton and Bush, people who disapprove of them in their performance during midterm elections tend to want to send a message, and they vote for the other party, which is why we've had so many wave elections recently. So that's one way of framing it. The other way of framing it is saying, well, Donald Trump got in the 40s last time, and the Republicans did carry the Senate and the House. Now, to get in the 40s and carry both chambers is unusual, and so we don't really know, again, what the future necessarily bring. Clearly, a stronger approval rating for President Trump would do his fellow party mates a whole lot of good.
One of the things that we always look at, and we actually talked about this, I think, on the first or second episode of Poll Hub in the middle of the summer when we started this podcast to really dig into polls, is we talked about the generic ballot. And I remember talking about how can there be a generic ballot? You don't just get to vote for Democrats or Republicans. You have to vote for people, and people do different things when they're voting for people than for parties. But this generic ballot question, as we discussed then and as we discuss now, does have relevance in terms of being able, and we said it at the time, in terms of being able to follow trends and movements in kind of generic sense of how people feel about a party, and that can translate into votes. What strikes me about this latest poll that we've just done is that it's a fairly narrow gap between Democrats and Republicans compared to what we've seen during the year in some other polls. What's up with that? Is there actually movement away from the Democratic, from people favoring Democrats in a generic ballot, or is there something more here?
I think one of the things that we see that's really interesting is that question, the generic ballot for Congress, where we ask whether people want to support the Democrat or Republican for Congress, seems to be, be affected by what we're talking about and what's going on in our politics. So if President Trump is in Asia, or if President Trump isn't tweeting in the middle of the night, if Congress isn't having one of these heated debates but is actually looking like it's doing something, that's a great thing for the GOP brand.
And is that what just happened in this poll? Because it's only an 8-point gap, right?
7.
A 7-point gap.
Yep. 7-6.
6. It's actually 6. Yeah, 46-40. We'll get to the right number sooner or later.
Well,
It's
so
within the error margin.
Yeah, right.
It's within the error margin.
So it's a 6-point gap, and this poll was taken when what was happening? That? In other words,
right after the tax reform bill became law.
Not that was so popular, but at least there was a sense among voters, particularly independents, that at least maybe it's getting a little more functional in Washington as opposed to being stalemated and broken.
And that's an important
the
thing.
narrowest gap
Yes.
since the trip to Asia.
Exactly.
What you said when it was only 3 points.
But what Lee pointed out in terms of the independents, that's very important because Democrats are locked into the Democrats and Republicans are locked into the Republicans. And so the only people that are really moving are people we call or refer to as independents who may lean one way or the other depending upon how things are going. And that's really what we're seeing when we have this generic question.
It's kind of incredible. If you're Donald Trump's political team, you just say, look, we can win in 2018 or at least staunch the losses if you just stay off Twitter, right?
Well,
I mean,
yes
maybe
and-
it's not
yes
that
and
simple,
no,
but
He did the last week before the election against Hillary Clinton. That someone took that, it was gone.
But wait,
No
a,
tweeting
but wait
that
a
week.
second. But wait a second. It's also, not just about Trump's tweeting. I mean, one of the things we have learned is that, hate trumps love when it comes to mobilizing people to get to the polls. And right now, the Democrats are very mobilized. I think that is what we're seeing in some of these special elections. The Republicans are much more satisfied with the direction of the country, how things are going, and with the administration and the Congress, being both Republican. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in terms of who gets to the polls.
The so-called enthusiasm factor, and it could be motivated by positive feelings, but also a send the message kind of outlook.
And one of the other things that we've talked about over the course of the last 6 or 8 months when we've been talking about polls is fake polls. And when we talk about fake polls, it may not be exactly the way that Donald Trump talks about fake polls. There are actually people who are putting polls out that are absolutely completely created from scratch, fake. There's no polling done, and they put it out there.
There are fake polls,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's hard to tell the difference, and sometimes it's just really obvious.
And then there are polls that are being run more as ads, and so
sure.
we talked. I teased at the beginning, sugging and
frugging.
and I wanted to make sure I enunciated that properly so that we didn't
Yes.
Have the
lose our
FCC.
podcast.
So
Yeah.
frugging.
So what is this?
Frugging is fundraising under the guise of research, which means you pretend to be doing a poll, but in actuality, you're pretending to get someone's opinion when in fact all you really want is their bank account.
Their money, yeah.
And you want to tell them, by doing this, you're allegedly doing some kind of survey, which you're not, but you're saying symbolically, your view really counts. Tell me what you think. And then, as Barb said, open your checkbook.
And sugging is closely related.
I would think it
the
probably
only
is.
difference, it's selling under the guise of research, but the only difference between sugging and frugging is that when you're sugging, you don't ask for the money up front, but it will come. That question will come shortly thereafter.
And why are we talking about this? Has this happened recently?
Yeah, there was and we should move away from those terms lest someone does some inversion of letters. Okay, so the Trump Make America Great Again committee, run by the RNC fundraising group, did such a thing only recently. And give you an example of the question. So it's not a survey. No one ever sees the results. They don't even probably tabulate any results. But
although it did make it onto social media, and I think
Yes.
that's why it became an issue.
Yeah, so you get to create some news, even if you're doing it by your own, without the filter of a journalist. But so here's a question about Trump's first year in office, which is what we're talking about earlier. How would you rate President Trump's first year in office? Great, good, okay, other. And
Which
then
kind of sounds like a Stephen Colbert
Yeah.
question.
Is this am I a great president or the greatest president? And the second one is they asked about President Obama's first year in office, and his choices were a little bit different. Great, good, okay, poor, and other. So now we have a slightly different, or very different.
Very
I should
different.
say.
There's no bad choice for Trump, really.
No, okay.
Okay is as bad as it gets,
Is
yeah.
the bottom rung on
Yeah.
that one. And clearly what you're doing here is you're getting a chance for Republicans to check the boxes.
And were they raising money on this? Were they frugging?
Yes.
Or yes.
Yes,
They were raising money off of this
It
money.
was,
yeah.
yes.
Well, I think they were actually sugging, although they were putting together a database and following up with fundraising.
So what's wrong with this? I mean, it seems like a stupid question in one way, but there is a
Everybody does it.
proliferation
Yeah,
on
everybody
Twitter
does it.
of these silly polls that aren't polls. Everybody knows they're polls. People are trolling and ganging up. Like there's people on the left on Twitter and people on the right on Twitter, and they'll go to the other side and they'll fill up a poll and make it go the other way because they can. They just send everybody to do that because they're not scientific polls. So do people not understand that? Is that part of the problem? Is that it's confusion and muddy the waters,
And
or
it gives what is an attempt at sometimes a serious measure of public opinion, because that's, after all, what a responsible scientific poll is trying to do. What does America think? And it makes it into this, which has absolutely nothing to do with what people think, other than the people who happen to answer this. But they're not necessarily representative of the cross-section.
Well, because of social media, look, this is not a new technique. The fact is that we are doing it and seeing it as much as we are because of social media. But politicians always sent out mailers because polls get attention, and they do much better than other kinds of mail and requests for dollars. So it makes sense to use it as a technique, but it isn't a poll. And I think what happens is it gets characterized as a poll.
It's a consumer beware kind of issue that we're trying to raise
But
here.
if you look at the comments that come back after one of our polls runs, like the NPR PBS NewsHour poll, and they did lots of social media around that, and the comments and the retweets and stuff that came back, so many of them were built on the notion that they didn't ask me. You didn't ask me, so the poll can't be right. And does that stem, at least in part, from this notion that people see polls and they get to vote and they think, oh, if I'm voting, then I'm participating, and if I don't vote, then I'm not counted, and therefore this poll is inaccurate.
Yeah, it's a good point, because our culture is all based upon you as an individual and what you think, and that's how you're marketed to. But the marketing that occurs is based on asking a few people who are representative and then generalizing to the larger population. So you don't necessarily get included, but dare I say, other folks who think similarly are, and that's how polls get to be accurate.
We talk a lot about politics on this show because that's a lot of what we poll, but we also poll lots of social issues, and we talk to people about what they're thinking about in so many other ways. One issue that kind of crosses that divide between politics and something that people talk about is reproductive rights, abortion, birth control, things like that. And we have a very long history of doing annual polls here at the Marist Poll for the Knights of Columbus, with the Knights of Columbus, on these very issues. And we've just wrapped up the latest one for 2017-2018. Are things changing? Where are we in this debate that kind of ebbs and flows as a major political issue? And a bit of an ebb right now, but it does seem like slowly but surely things are changing in some ways.
Well, I think just like many issues that we discuss publicly and have debates over, this one gets characterized as being very polarized and characterized by, I think, the people who are most active in the on the issue, and
On both sides.
on both sides, absolutely. And so we often, looking at public polls, I think this comes down to also an issue in polling on how we phrase and characterize the question that we ask people about their opinion. And it's a complex issue, and I think people have much more nuanced positions on the issue than just the labels would suggest.
Right.
So you can be more than just pro-choice, pro-life. Yeah.
So when we've been asking the question, we do it a couple of different ways, and we do ask it in a binary way, whether people associate or consider themselves to identify with one label or the other, whether it be pro-choice or pro-life. But we also go a step farther, and we ask the question, giving a whole list of potential positions that you might have on abortion. And then when we do that, what's very interesting is that we end up seeing a consensus on the issue. Instead of it being so polarized, actually half of Americans actually think that there should be exceptions rather than restrictions to abortion, meaning in cases of rape, incest, and for the life of the mother. And about another quarter of Americans also feel that abortion should be restricted to the first 3 months of pregnancy. So what we see is that there is a consensus, there is an acceptance of differences, I think.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing is in the news, and I think this is somewhat put forward by the groups themselves, as Barb said, who are more committed on either extreme. So we have the black and white, and that comes through, pro-choice, pro-life, what have you. But what we see in our numbers when we use so many different gradations of things from one side to the other, that there's the gray area is actually larger than the other two combined. And that probably suggests that, people are not as divided on this issue as I think the conception and popular conception suggests.
Is that partly why, as a political issue, it has waned a bit from maybe the height would have been during the in the first decade after Roe v. Wade, certainly during Reagan, and then Pat Robertson runs for president, and there's throughout the 90s there was a lot of talk. It does seem that it has.
Although I think I would suggest that right now, though, with the sense that the Supreme Court is tipping one way or the other, or might go, and with President Trump, perhaps getting additional picks before his term ends, that could have an impact on this. I think that's why we're seeing a lot of people who oppose any change in the law and change by the court out there protesting.
Is there any age difference? Because in so many things that we talk about now, we talk about the generational differences. Millennials being this huge generation, being very, very, very monolithic in terms of the certain things that they have views on, like marijuana reform or marriage, things like
Absolutely.
that. What about this? This has been a touchstone cultural issue. Is there a generational divide that you're saying?
There is a generational difference. I don't think as large as people would imagine. And I think it gets back to the idea of millennials in particular being very accepting of differences. I thought one of the things that we measured in this poll was whether people thought that it was morally acceptable or morally unacceptable to think in terms of having an abortion because a child may be born with some kind of a genetic issue. And millennials really took exception to that. In other words, they thought that really wasn't a good reason to have an abortion. And I think it is their acceptance of differences, their acceptance of diversity that really guides them in understanding this particular issue.
But the big takeaway here is that we tend to put issues like this in black and white. The media does that. I think we do that. Mm-hmm. And huzzah, here's to the shades of gray. Because that's where the vast majority of Americans
and also,
lie.
We've been pleased that over the 10 years that we've been doing this to work with the Knights of Columbus to, have us conduct scientific, rigorous polls that have uncovered this different view than what the conventional wisdom is all about. So I think that's really good. Plus, it got us a chance to go to the National Press Club, go to Washington. That's good.
Well, that will do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, and we want to thank our executive producer, Mary Griffith.
And we encourage people, as we do each week, to send your questions or topic suggestions to pollhub@marist.edu. We have some good ideas coming up in the future for polls, but maybe you have some better ones, and we certainly would be welcome to entertaining those.
Yeah, send them along. You can also check us out on social media. We are every place that you are on social media. So at Marist Poll on Twitter, we're on Facebook, Marist Poll, Snapchat, and Instagram. And don't forget, whatever you're listening to us on your phone or whatever device it is, there's a subscribe button. Please hit it and also favorite us. You can also rate us. That helps us be more discoverable in the podcast stores so that people who are looking for podcasts will see your views about us, and it'll help them find us if they're interested in polling. So help us out with that and help out your fellow podcast listeners too. That's it. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.